What is up, everybody? Nice little swig of my Pel to get going here. We are live, off and running with another live show tonight. We're going to talk some college football playoff. I've been trying to give you updates on that on the channel here as more updates have become available, as we have found out more things about the meetings that have taken place this week. I would say that this latest update is a little bit more favorable to the Big 12 than what we were hearing earlier in the week and what I did a video kind of ranting about, which I did not feel was very good, very positive news for the Big 12. Going to do that today. I got a long rundown of things. We have a conference about to poach another conference. We have literal conference realignment happening right before our eyes. We've got one conference ready to go take teams from another. That according to multiple reports. So we're definitely going to fire that up and talk about that here tonight. I would tell you that the biggest game of the Big 12 season is taking place this weekend. And look, this is for mainly future members of the Big 12, right? I think in the context of talking about the Big 12 at this point, you have to really be mostly talking about the people that are the schools that will be in the league moving forward, right? So that probably gives you a little bit of insight and a little bit of a hint to where I'm going with that. We can talk biggest surprise of the Big 12 season so far, because I think that's a pretty good conversation between Texas, Baylor, and Iowa State. Are the Oklahoma struggles legit? My Cats have Oklahoma this weekend, so we need to discuss that, whether or not the Sooners really have major problems here. We can do that as well. And man, has anybody seen Gary Patterson lately? Is Gary Patterson doing all right? He's been a little fiery, a little salty this week. I want to make sure that that good old G-Pat, K-State grad, by the way, make sure that he's doing okay after everything that's gone on between TCU and SMU with a pretty feisty battle for the Iron Skillet here over the weekend. So a lot on the docket tonight on the live chat. I want to talk about it all with you. Get in the chat. Give me your questions. Give me your comments. And let's make it happen tonight. If you want to donate, you click the $sign below the chat box where it says say something. That will make sure that your question or comment gets up to the top of the chat. I will see it, and it will skip the line in front of everybody if you want to go that route. But appreciate all of you guys that are here. Appreciate all of the support as always. Adam, the first comment in the chat tonight has to be about firing Matt Wells. We're firing Matt Wells after giving up a 70 piece, giving up the old 70 spot to the Texas Longhorns over the weekend. I can understand the frustration there. I mean, does it make you feel better or worse about Wells that, he lost his quarterback in the game, that Tyler Shuck got knocked out for the rest of the year? Is it the rest of the year, or at least a while, like 8 weeks? Did I see that for Shuck, 8 weeks? That Shuck is going to be out. I feel bad for him. I feel bad for Texas Tech. Really do. Truly do. All right, let's talk playoff here, man, because I've got some real issues with what's going on with the playoff and some of what the holdup is, because the holdup in large part surrounds whether there are 6 weeks for Shuck. Okay, there are a couple of things here. One, let me just give you the latest update. Per Twitter, Adam Rittenberg says Bill Hancock says if the college football playoff model changes before the end of the initial contract, it would need to be in 3 to 4 months. If it changes after the initial contract, they have several years to sort it out. Discuss bowls, media rights, calendar for games. We also have Heather Dinich saying meetings here have ended. This was on Tuesday. So meetings here have ended. Not much news. College football playoff executive director Bill Hancock reiterated, we have time. The 10 FBS commissioners and Jack Swarbrick at Notre Dame met for about 2 hours before the presidents joined them by Zoom. So we had this story from Ross Dellinger that was initially saying on Tuesday that by Wednesday, college football officials are hoping to have agreed to a framework for an expanded college football playoff. We don't have that. But at least what we have is seemingly a little bit more of a positive update than what we had before. Because what we had before was, that we're getting Greg Sankey quotes about there potentially being talk of going back down to 4. Obviously, there's been talk of 8. But there was a quote here in this article that there's not a lot of consensus on that. It was, quote, nowhere near a majority, says one conference administrator, on an 8-team playoff. And the problem there is, like, with an 8-team playoff, you're not going to get agreement on what's going on from everybody, because you have the SEC and Notre Dame wanting as many at-large bids as possible and not having the auto bids. Obviously, everybody else wants the auto bids, right? So there's a pretty clear disagreement there. We also have disagreement about what's going on with the Rose Bowl, and that's a part of this that really bothers me. But before I get to the Rose Bowl part, to finish the thought here on why this was bad for the Big 12 earlier, and I've talked about this on the channel here before, but look, 4-team playoff, I think we can all understand. If this thing went to 4 teams and became just this beauty pageant that it's already been, for the new look Big 12, there's just no chance of anybody ever getting in. I mean, as it currently stands, Texas and Oklahoma have like a legitimate standing shot to get into the playoff, and that's about it. Because we've already seen what happened when Baylor and TCU were trying to get in there, right, in 2015. Baylor and TCU were trying to get in there, and it was a disaster. TCU drops from 3-6 at the last second. And then, I can't see if it's going to be 4 teams at any point in the future, it's not going to be good, man. All right, I'm seeing so many comments about the static here at this point. Guys, I don't know what's going on. And the last time I tried to do this, it was an epic fail, and I tried to unplug it and plug it back in, and it didn't work. Is it really truly that bad? Is it really truly that bad? Because I'm seeing a couple people complain, and I'm seeing a couple people that are just rolling on with the chat. Like, I don't know, man. I'm inclined to just keep going with this, because the last time that I unplugged it, it wouldn't let me adjust what. Okay, so let's do this then. If I turn the level down, is that going to be better? Does that sound a little better to you guys? Turn the level down. Hopefully that helped out. I'm using different programs now where the audio levels, sometimes I need to crank it up a little bit more. So hopefully that will help. Okay, not that bad. It was worse last time. It's not bad. Keep going. We're going to keep going. So if you guys, you can keep complaining, keep throwing static in there, but I'm not changing. I'm not changing. I'll go listen to it after the show is over this time and see if I'll push the mic back. I'll go listen after the show is over and see if I can hear what's going on, if it truly is just that it's a little bit too loud. Okay, so now that I am not distracted. So on the playoff, man, I mean, if it would just be a disaster for the Big 12 if this thing ever went to 8 without auto bids, or if it went to 4 with, whatever the scenario you want to say. If it's going to be 4, then essentially you're just talking about what it is right now, where everything is not an auto bid. That's a disaster for the Big 12, and you have to hope that that's not going to happen. And when I saw that quote out there from Sankey where he was like, hey, man, it's fine, we could just keep it at 4, I was like, God, all this hemming and hawing about the playoff right now. I mean, I think that's just posturing from Sankey. Of course he can say that because the current system works well for his league. A 12-team playoff would work well for his league. An 8-team playoff without auto bids would work well for his league. Any of that stuff would be great for him. But I got really nervous when I started reading that. Now, at least, we see Ross Dellinger with this update where he's saying they initially had hoped to, by the end of today, have some framework for an expanded college football playoff. That their meeting last week was basically getting all the issues out there in front of everybody and figuring out what it is that they need to find some common ground on, find a compromise on. They did not apparently get this framework ironed out. I have not seen any updates about that today. So apparently the word now is what those quotes were that we were getting, like, hey, we have time to figure this out. That at least is more positive for the Big 12, because it seems like now everybody is at least back on the same page of like, hey, let's try to push this forward. Let's try to move this forward. Let's get it toward a 12-team playoff. The other part that was just maddening is hearing that there was a conference reportedly that was basically trying to stick up for ESPN and say, like, hey, we don't want this to be bid out to multiple partners, which there are reports that it could be 3 times the money if you milk the playoff out to different TV partners that would televise different portions of the playoff, which would be, to me, just way too much money involved for that to ever not happen. So I would think that we're still eventually moving there at some point. But yeah, like that to me is where you have to get. You have to get to 12, or if you're going to do 8 with auto bids, that would probably be fine for the Big 12 as well. But I'm closely monitoring that, because it just does not seem that there was that much discussion about it. It doesn't seem like there was that much discussion about like the potential ramifications of that. Because if I'm the Big 12, like I would be freaking out about that. because just any talk of somebody giving an inch. Now it has to be a unanimous vote to change it, to expand it beyond what it is now. But like then if you can't get a unanimous vote and nothing happens and it just sticks at 4 and the next round comes up and you bid it out to whoever it's going to be, whatever TV partners, and it just sticks at 4, you're screwed. You're in all kinds of trouble if you're the Big 12. You know, I mean, this league would take such a major hit if there literally is no playoff access. We know that it's going to take a hit somewhat in prestige with Texas and Oklahoma going, certainly in the short term. We know it's going to take a hit financially. That's going to keep the Big 12 behind some leagues. But if you compound that with you don't actually have a legitimate path to the playoff, that is like a death knell for the conference. I mean, how at that point are you going to legitimately recruit against other schools that already have a financial advantage over you? How are you going to keep coaches there, keep coaches from using you as stepping stone jobs? Like there are all these just massive ramifications that come from that, if that's what's going to happen. So I just, to me, it's even if you don't think it's very likely, that still should be something we're talking more about and trying to generate more discussion about. And it has really kind of blown my mind. I think a lot of it is that we're in season, right? And so there's not going to be as much discussion about it while we're actually in season. There's more to distract. There's the actual football to distract. But I would hope that if this were the offseason, we would have more people advocating right now hard for, like, guys, get this figured out. Get the 12-team thing figured out so that this league doesn't just totally crumble by virtue of not actually having legitimate playoff access. Yeah, so Brad says Barry Alvarez was on Big Ten Network the other day saying they want 8-team playoff and to limit the number of teams from a single conference. Okay. I mean, look, if you want to limit the amount of teams from a single conference, I'm down with that, obviously, because I think we all look at this and say, like, the advantage that would give there is hardcore to the SEC. The SEC we know would be the league that would get a bunch of teams in. If it's 8 teams, you have to get auto bids. I mean, that's the thing for the Big 12. If it's 8 teams, you cannot vote for anything that's not going to have an automatic bid for your conference champion, because that just gets too dicey. Because it is a beauty contest. And I think it's interesting you bring up Barry Alvarez, because he was supposedly one of the big voices in the room in 2015 that kept TCU and Baylor out. Because to me, Barry Alvarez kind of screams like the prestige privilege there of being in the playoff, where it's like he was really advocating for Ohio State, even though I will tell you to the day I die, they did not deserve to be in the 2015 playoff. I don't care if they won the national championship or not. I mean, it's the Barry Alvarez's of the world that are like kind of the problem here, because they are the ones that buy into the dog and pony show aspect of this more and buy into the traditional brands and the same thing the same trappings that college football has always been a slave to, which is just that it is much more of a beauty pageant than an actual meritocracy. You know, I see Tim in there, Timothy, saying if it's an 8-team, why should the SEC be punished for being better than everyone else? I assume you mean everyone else than anyone else. I don't think it's punishing the SEC. It's just trying to put a limit on like this absolute power that the SEC seems to have. And it's been like these are the instances when I say the SEC has been propped up by ESPN. It's like those instances where it's like, okay, we're going to say that the playoff should be 7 of the 8 teams should be from the SEC, right? I mean, you hear stuff like that, and those things turn into talking points, and it's clear that turns into a runaway freight train of just propaganda for the SEC. That's kind of been a self-fulfilling prophecy over the years. So I'm not trying to punish the SEC, but I am trying to just make it a much more fair and equitable experience for everybody, because we're just over time we have pushed too far that way. So I'm not trying to punish the SEC, but I am trying to put some limits on how much we can really push the dog and pony show and like, oh, the SEC is so much better than everything. You know, the Paul Feinbaum attitude of the world from that taking over the entire playoff. And see, Timothy, like I see what's happening in the chat. Like Timothy says, nobody in the new Big 12 is a top 20 brand. Who bleeping cares? Like, why does that matter for the playoff? You are committing a worse offense on the opposite side of this than I am by saying, hey, we should limit the amount of teams from one conference in there. You're trying to say no one in the Big 12 is a top 20 brand, so they shouldn't get in the playoff. You are literally trying to restrict access to teams, not based on merit on the field, but based on what their brand is. Get out of here with that. Like that is the ridiculous part of this, and that is what we're trying to stop. Like, you are the problem. I'm sorry, Timothy. You are the problem. If that's the attitude that you have, that, hey, nobody in the Big 12 is a top 20 brand, so get them out of the playoff. We just need more SEC teams. in the playoff. Come on, man. Daniel, I see you asking about the live chat and YouTube post. What's the schedule for these live chats? I do them Wednesday and Sunday night right now. Daniel, in season, we are going Wednesday and Sunday nights for the live chats. At around, it kind of depends. I don't have like a set time for it, but it's typically in the 7 o'clock hour, 7 to 7:15. Most likely for that is when you're going to see it. 7, 7:15, 7:30. But just subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on the alert, the little bell, and you'll get an alert every time that I do go live. So you'll be able to figure that out. So yeah, that's where things stand on the playoff front. It makes me nervous because that to me holds the future of the conference in its hands much more than almost anything else that we're talking about here. Whole idea about this and what you've always heard is like, who knows what Power 5 will mean, Autonomous 5 means, but you need to get you need to actually get into playoff access, or the conference is going to be in a lot of trouble. Okay. Am I the more haterade version of 365 Sikkim? If I am, man, then proud to do it. I will rage against the SEC and rage against the typical powers that be in college football, I guess is probably the best way to say it. That's the whole point of this channel, man. The whole point of this channel is trying to give a perspective from Big 12 country. And look, we're just always being overlooked, man. We're always being overlooked. But I've also covered realignment quite a bit, and I know I do have a decent amount of people here who care about what's going on just with expansion in general. With expansion in general, we have an update from the AAC. And by the way, I'll mention here too, if you want to get your question or comment to the top, separated from the rest of the chat, you can donate by clicking the $ under the chat box, under the say something box there. Or if you just want to support a content creator, you can certainly do that as well if you feel so inclined. So here's what we have on the AAC. There are multiple reports now that Colorado State and Air Force are expected to join the AAC. Brett McMurphy from the Action Network was first to report the news. That still sounds weird. I had just gotten used to Brett McMurphy at Stadium. Now he's at the Action Network. Brett McMurphy first reported the news, saying the move could likely happen next week. Man, this surprises me. I know that the word seems to be that nobody is very confident right now in Mountain West Commissioner Craig Thompson, who I'll be honest, I did not have any idea who he was until about maybe like 2 weeks ago. I first started seeing his name pop up with some quotes. But apparently nobody is a big fan of him. I don't know the Mountain West well enough to know exactly what the deal is there, but that must be the case, because otherwise for like Colorado State and Air Force, it feels like going for the Mountain West to the AAC is going to be a slight monetary gain, which could be offset by travel costs simply by where you're going to have to send your non-revenue sports, and even just your revenue sports, like how much you're going to have to travel there. You're going to take away some of the regional rivalries. I can see why you would say, hey, the AAC has been a conference that's a slight step above the Mountain West, and we're trying to improve our prestige here, but this doesn't even feel equitable to me to the AAC teams joining the Big 12, right? There was an element of that was like, hey, this is a step up, but maybe just a moderate step up. I don't even think this holds that same kind of water. I'm like, I mean, okay, you want to make that move, you want to change it up, you don't believe in your commissioner. I guess the play here must be, if I'm just thinking out loud and reasoning here for Colorado State and Air Force, like, we don't believe in the Mountain West commissioner. At some point, we're going to lose the top end teams in this league. At some point, Boise's going to be gone to the Big 12. And maybe that's it. At some point, Boise's going to be gone to the Big 12, and we don't trust that this league is going to stay alive or stay as viable as it is right now. I don't know, man. I'm a little bit surprised. Now, definitely not shocking. Definitely not shocking to see that Boise is not really buying that, and that the top targets there out of the Mountain West are not going to go. But I didn't even think these kind of middle tier schools would go, because look, like Colorado State and Air Force, you can't say like, hey, you should stick around and wait for the Big 12 to invite you, because they've kind of been on the very, very peripheral edge of that conversation, but not much real serious talk at all. They're not going to get an invite to the Big 12, so it's not like you're waiting around for that. But Just seems like geographically, financially, from a travel standpoint, it makes a lot of sense for them to just stick around. And I'm surprised, there's just a lot that comes with changing conferences. And I'm surprised that is the route that they would actually want to go here. But I did see someone throw in there in the chat. I'm sorry, I lost who it was, that they're doing it for Eastern TV exposure. I mean, like, okay, I guess if you want to add to that, I'm sure there will be a little bit more of that. Like the Mountain West is kind of like the Pac-12 light, Mountain West after dark with Pac-12 after dark, a version of that just without quite as much exposure. I guess I can see that. I mean, look, the Pac-12 is trying to move east in terms of its time zones to get more eyeballs and just more attention on the league. So I guess I can see that from one angle, but it doesn't seem to me like it would be totally worth making the move. But we'll keep monitoring that. I mean, and obviously the ripple effects are going to continue with this, because if they do leave, now what happens to the Mountain West? Who is the Mountain West going to look to try and replace them with? Does that influence anything else that's happening in the conference? I think everything will continue to trickle downward. I don't think that's going to like hasten the Big 12 going after Boise or anything like that. But yeah, and I mean, a fair point. Air Force will also get to play Navy in conference. I mean, okay. I can see some small things here, but to me, it just doesn't add up to enough to where I would think that they should actually leave the league. Shout out to Chris, man. Chris Maben throwing in a donation. Much, much appreciated, Chris. No question or comment, just the donation. Really, thank you for the support, man. Means a lot that you guys do that. Elvin is in here with a question, and thank you for the donation as well, Elvin. If you want to donate something as well, click the $ below the chat box. Everyone says the SEC is propped up, but the SEC always delivers in non-con games, bowl games, and the BCS playoff. It's not ESPN bias. The SEC is just better. I think that the answer lies somewhere in between on that, Elvin. I would say the SEC. Look, the SEC is the best conference in college football. I'm not going to argue that, and that's pretty much true every single year. I will not argue that at all. At the same time, there is clearly a little bit of a boost that they get. Like I would put it like this. To me, the analogy is akin to like Barry Bonds and the baseball players that were roided up, that juiced. Especially I shouldn't say all of them, because there were very average baseball players who juiced to try and have some above average seasons. But like Barry Bonds was an excellent baseball player who juiced to turn into like this superpower superhuman. I think the SEC is like Barry Bonds. Like if you just left it without the extra super propping up, it's not a very good term, but without the extra push that ESPN gives them, they would still be like an all-time great conference. They'd still be the best conference out there. But the steroids definitely do help, and they definitely do add something, and they definitely do take them to this other level that is, borderline unfair, I would say, to the rest of the college football world. And it's just happened gradually over time. It's been very gradual. It's never anything like totally overt. Well, maybe until now with ESPN really helping the SEC with this Texas and Oklahoma thing. It's never been totally overt, but it's been, okay, a little bit more talk about ESPN. I remember like 2010, 2011 being the real genesis of that. Maybe like the immediate post-Tim Tebow era where it was like, okay, look at the SEC, and it gets more programming, it gets more airtime on ESPN. So there's more exposure there. There's free exposure, which leads to better recruiting, which leads to more talk about it, which leads to better recruiting. And eventually you get to the point where it's like, okay, well, this is the only conference that anybody really respects. And now they're going out and adding Texas and Oklahoma with the help of ESPN in the background there to make this happen. And ESPN's their primary TV sponsor that just paid them $3 billion for this TV contract. And, now we're sitting here talking about, hey, should we put limits on how many teams can get in the playoff? And I've got somebody in the chat running around like, well, none of these other teams are brands. The SEC has all these brands. Like, okay. But again, brands that it's kind of been wind aided. If Usain Bolt broke his own record in the 100 meters or whatever, but there was a 40-mile-an-hour wind gust behind him right as it happened, he's still great. He's still excellent. He still might be the best in the world, but he's getting a little boost. He's getting an extra boost there. So that to me is what it is with the SEC. You can call me a hater if you want, but I think that's the reality. And look, I'm not even like, I'm not one of these people who's out here like, I won't watch the SEC. No, man, I love SEC football. I do. I love watching SEC football. There's no denying that at all. Like that 2:30 CBS game every single week, like that's always a great game. It's awesome, and the SEC plays great football. I will watch it at all times. I love the sport, and even if the Big 12 dies off, man, I will still, probably much to my chagrin, be watching SEC football. But that doesn't mean that I can't still point out that they've had some extra help. They've had some extra help to get to the point of being like completely, almost monopolizing the sport. You know, there's a difference between being the best in the sport and heading towards a monopoly. And right now we're like on the path to a monopoly for the SEC. So that's how I would explain it. But I appreciate the question. Certainly appreciate the donation. And, you know, I assume you're an SEC fan in here and still donating and hanging out in the chat. Like, I appreciate that a ton. I really, really do. So, yeah, on the AAC front, man, we'll continue to monitor that and see what happens. I also applaud, I think the other angle on this to say is, like, if Air Force and Colorado State, if that's really happening and the AAC really is able to poach some teams from the Mountain West, it's a heck of a job by Mike Oresco. And Oresco's been kind of a punching bag of mine at times. And maybe not really punching bag, just kind of an enemy, because I always respected him. I mean, that's the part. I always respected him. And I thought he was a good commissioner, and I think this backs that up. Like, if he's able to pull this off, he shot for the stars. How does it go? You shoot for the stars, you land in the moon. The stars are further away, right? So you shoot for the stars, you land in the moon. You know, he didn't get Boise, but he may wind up getting 2 pretty nice consolation prizes. That's pretty good. That's good work. Okay, I see Keith in there. Keith, that's a great comment, man. Keith says the Big 12 needs to poach Mike Oresco along with Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF. Yeah, what's the buyout on that? What's the exit fee for Mike Oresco? How much would Mike Oresco have to pay to leave the AAC for the Big 12? I actually don't think that's a horrible idea. I think the guy's a pretty good commissioner, and I know obviously there's been a lot of frustration with Bob Bowlesby at times here. So I can understand why you would say that. That's pretty good. That's clever. I appreciate that comment a lot. Let's see what we have next here. All right. Do we want to talk some actual football here? Some actual football. I guess let's bridge the gap here on a borderline football story. The battle for the Iron Skillet. I actually took some heat in the chat. I think the chat that I did on Sunday from someone who said, like, man, you just did an hour and not even a mention of TCU SMU. I would have to imagine that's an SMU fan and not a TCU fan in here because of how that game went, where SMU really controlled the second half. I actually watched a lot of the battle for the Iron Skillet. What is going on with this Gary Patterson versus SMU and Jerry Kill, like, getting a concussion from the battle at midfield? So if you're not familiar with the story, SMU wins the game. They go to midfield and try to do the Baker Mayfield, like, plant the flag thing, and it turns into this huge fight. And Jerry Kill, who used to be, he was Minnesota's head coach, right? I mean, he's been a head coach for a while. Now is just helping. He's like an advisor to Gary Patterson. He spent a hot minute with Bill Snyder, actually, at one point in time on the K-State staff too. But he's always dealt with epilepsy and seizures, and there have been a lot of problems there. And so Gary Patterson was really like, hey, man, this guy got a concussion from this. He got knocked over, and he accused an SMU player of hitting him with a helmet, which has never been corroborated with video evidence that anybody has seen. And supposedly it was TCU players who actually did hit Kill and knocked him down. But, you know, it was all pushing and shoving. So it's like the fact that the fight happened is the reason that happened. And I'll say this. If you are SMU and you're going to the middle of the field with the flag, you have to be expecting a fight. Like, in football terms, that is the equivalent of, you know, if you're like a drunk dude at a bar and you're in a verbal altercation with somebody and you call a guy the B word, that's generally going to be a term that elicits a fight, right? You just kind of know that. And with SMU, you just kind of know if you're going to go plant the flag on TCU's field at midfield after beating them, you're going to start a fight. So you better be ready for that and the consequences that come from it. And I definitely don't want Jerry Kill getting hurt. Like, that sucks. That sucks that happened. But, man, it was like you had Gary Patterson coming out initially fired up about it. Then you had the AD at SMU apologized and said that he was told Gary Patterson would kind of walk back the comments. Well, that didn't happen. Instead, GPAT just like doubled up, man. He pushed all his chips into the middle of the table and said like, oh, okay, you guys really are the a-holes here and screwed this up. I'm just like, man, Gary Patterson seems to be in like he gives no you-know-what's mode right now. Like he's toward the end of his career. Obviously, he has a very established reputation and track record at TCU. He just doesn't seem to care about what he's doing at this point. So I guess, I don't know. I'd be curious if there are TCU fans in here. I'd be very curious what your thoughts are on that because I don't know, man. It like borders to me on like, all right, like, are you making good points or are you just a little bit off the rails because you're getting older and care less about what people think, almost to the point of it being to your own detriment? Like, that's been the story this week. TCU has Texas, and that's been a series that they've dominated. They've won 7 of the last 9. That's a big game for them. It's a conference game. They need to get back on track. Like, this is a huge week, and instead the whole story, the week has been dominated so far by talk of what's gone on with SMU. So I don't know. Is that worth it to you if you're a TCU fan? Is that worth it to you if you're Gary Patterson? I can tell you what I would think if I were a TCU fan, and I would not think that it would be worth it because I wouldn't want the distraction and I wouldn't want the constant reminder and embarrassment that we just lost to SMU again. Like, that's the other thing. It just keeps it in the news cycle that, oh yeah, SMU beat TCU. This team that's not in a power conference that's in the same metro area just beat you. You know what I'm seeing? That there are big billboards up right now in Fort Worth that are advertising for SMU. Like, they're kind of clowning on you, man. They're kind of clowning on you. So I would not be a huge fan of that, and I would be wondering what exactly that's doing for you at this point if you're TCU. And I have all the respect in the world for Gary Patterson as a coach. At one point in time, definitely really wanted him as K-State's head coach. Again, he's a K-State grad. I'm a K-State guy. I love me some Gary Patterson, but I don't know that I'm loving some of these comments that we're seeing on a fairly regular basis out of Patterson at this point in time. All right, as for the Big 12 weekend, I made this point in a video earlier this week. There was a clip from my radio show, but the biggest game of the Big 12 season, I would tell you, is this weekend, and it is Cincinnati and Notre Dame. And I know that ruffles some feathers. Oh, Cincinnati's not a member of the Big 12 conference. Look, guys, I get it. I understand that they're not. This channel, obviously, if you've been around here very long, you know that it's mainly focused on the teams that are going to remain in the Big 12 once Texas and Oklahoma leave. So if we're talking about what's important to like the long-term future of the Big 12, there is not a game bigger on the schedule this year than Cincinnati, Notre Dame. Maybe if, I don't know, I'd have to like look at BYU's schedule. I shouldn't totally just write BYU out of this discussion. If they keep winning games, maybe there's a game at the end of their schedule where you say, hey, if this actually gives them an outside shot at least getting into the playoff discussion, being there around 5, 6, 7, then that could be a game around the same value. But Cincy Notre Dame, like, that's been hyped up since the offseason. We knew going into the year that was going to be the game that Cincy had to have to legitimately be in the playoff discussion. So that to me, I mean, it takes precedent. And just look, BYU is going to get their shot at Notre Dame next year, but there are a few brands that have the value that Notre Dame does in college football. And so getting a chance to go do that in Notre Dame's house for Cincinnati this weekend, man, that's a big time opportunity. And I'm going to relate this back to the chat earlier and what happened in the discussion earlier. We had, hey, the Big 12 doesn't have any top 20 brands. How can you let them in the playoff in the future? Well, Cincinnati can do a lot to improve its brand by beating Notre Dame. And by beating Notre Dame, winning out, and getting yourself firmly in the playoff discussion at the end of the year, that will definitely help out Cincinnati's brand. They were already there last year, right? I mean, they were pretty close. They were on the cusp of it last year and kind of got screwed with the way that they were treated by the playoff selection committee just in terms of the rankings and everything. So you do it 2 years in a row, and who knows, maybe it works out to where you are. It's a wacky year in college football. Look at how vulnerable some of the powers at the top look, like Ohio State, Clemson, Oklahoma. Maybe this is the kind of, doesn't it feel, I've already heard some national guys saying this feels 2070, which is the year that like Kansas and South Florida and UConn all had great years and were way up to the top or toward the top of the BCS standings. This is the kind of year where this game really could launch Cincinnati actually into the playoff. And like, those are the kind of things you need to do to improve your brand value and how much just like name recognition you have. And those are things that can help the Big 12 immediately. Assuming that Cincy gets in 2023, even if Cincy falls off a little bit next year and they were coming into the league in 2023 and you said, well, hey, man, 2 of the last 3 years, they've been in the college football playoff discussion. It's a huge boost for the Big 12. That's a huge, huge boost for the Big 12. So I'm stoked for it, man. I mean, look, you guys know where my loyalties lie. I'm not a huge Notre Dame fan because, again, it's like I feel like I'm always fighting for the little guys, so to speak, schools that don't seem to have as much of a national brand, and the Big 12 not getting as much respect. Notre Dame's on the opposite end of that spectrum, so I've always been, annoyed by that. I think much like the SEC, I'll say Notre Dame gets propped up just by their pure name value, in the same way. So I'm not a huge Notre Dame fan, so I'm inclined to root for Cincinnati hard anyway in that game, and it just ramps it up tenfold when I know that Cincinnati is coming to the Big 12, and I know that what it could mean. I know what it could potentially mean to the league's future. So make no mistake, if you're a Big 12 fan that's not a Texas or an Oklahoma fan, you really need to watch that game, and you really need to be pulling for Cincinnati to win. That would go a long way. You've already had, I think, like on the opposite end of the spectrum, you've had Iowa State kind of slip up and falter along those same lines in the league where they're getting roasted by Feinbaum for their loss to Iowa. Now they go out and lose to Baylor in the first conference game. They're certainly not going to be in the playoff discussion this year, and that was kind of the hope and the thought and the vibe maybe around this Iowa State team, and that hasn't happened, so somebody else has to pick up the slack. And right now, I guess you hope that that's Cincinnati, right? You definitely hope that that's going to be Cincinnati with this game against Notre Dame. So yeah, very, very excited for that, and hope that Cincinnati brings it home. Christian with a donation. Thank you, Christian. Much appreciated. Christian says, great interactions on these chats. Would love to see you interact with the comments on your videos as well. I will try to do some more of that, Christian. I will give you look. I'm pretty open and honest at all times here. The deal with that is that, one, there are so many, and I say that as humbly as possible, but the videos have gotten to the point now where there's typically at least 100 comments on every video, so it's a lot to try and keep up with. I used to be better at responding because I would still get the email alerts coming to me, like whenever there was a comment, or it wasn't probably every single comment, but at least most, I would get an email, and it started to be too much. I couldn't keep up with it all, and I was just getting bombarded with emails constantly, and I'm already trying to cut down on my phone time, right? And then the other thing is, like, look, man, when you have hundreds of YouTube comments every day coming at you, there are a lot of people, talking bleep, and it gets frustrating. You want to respond to all these things. You just get mad. It's like, I don't want to constantly be frustrated and angry with people. For instance, the most viewed video I have on my channel, I didn't check my wardrobe beforehand and my collar was messed up. And it's like, okay, do I need to see 300 times somebody tell me that my collar is messed up? It gets under your skin a little bit. It does. And I just, between that and Twitter and message boards and the K-State community and all that stuff, it's like, I have a lot of that already where I find myself getting angry, and I have to just kind of distance myself from some of it. You get better at it the longer you do this. But there are still moments where I'm like, I need to just detach a little bit. So that's really the only reason, Christian, that I don't. It's a combination of those things. I will try to poke my head in there a little bit more. What I've been trying to do now is, like, every time I actually log on to my YouTube studio page, it'll show me like the latest 3 or 4 comments. And if I happen to see it, I try to go look at least 1 or 2 of those and respond, or at least toss a like to some stuff that's nice. Jaybird, don't worry about it, man. Jaybird, there are far more trolls and far worse trolls than just you out there. You're fine. You're fine, man. And even if you guys are like trolling in the chat, man, I enjoy some of this. I do. I enjoy seeing some of the trolling in the chat. It livens it up. So you guys can keep doing it in the chat here in the video. That's great. All right, let's move on to Oklahoma. So K-State plays Oklahoma, and this is now a chance for me to kind of relate what's going on to me hyper locally to what actually matters with the Big 12. Look, Oklahoma is the playoff shot for the league this year. Maybe Texas. I don't know. Texas would be an interesting discussion there. Like, Arkansas is right now highly enough thought of that I don't think, that loss would definitely be something that kept Texas out if they continued to win. But look, Oklahoma, I think realistically is the playoff shot for the Big 12. And there's a lot of discussion right now about I mean, they look down just like Ohio State does, just like Clemson does, but they have won games. They do continue to win games. They're undefeated. I don't think there should be as much alarm about Oklahoma as there is right now. And I say that again as somebody who, I hope they get drilled this weekend. I would love nothing more than K-State to beat them for a third straight season and for Skylar Thompson to continue to be Oklahoma's kryptonite and all of that. Would love nothing more than to see it. But I think there are a couple things working against Oklahoma here. One, I think they merely just have very good talent as opposed to this hyper elite offensive talent, which was bound to happen at some point. Spencer Rattler has these crazy expectations where he's following in the footsteps of not just two guys that won the Heisman and not just three Heisman finalists, but also three guys that are starting quarterbacks in the NFL right now. And I know Jalen Hurts did not look very good on Monday, but they're three starting NFL quarterbacks. They're guys that have just been as elite as it gets in college football. And so following in the footsteps of that, you're never going to live up to those expectations. And so I think that obviously is hurting. I think there's also the element of, this is where, look, Kansas fans, I'm gonna dig in on somebody else with the same thing I get you guys with. There's an earned arrogance to Oklahoma fans, much in the same way there's an earned arrogance to Kansas fans in basketball. And that kind of bleeds its way out onto the field with the Caleb Williams chants and all of that. So you have a spoiled fan base. You've got expectations nationally for Spencer Rattler just to be the next guy to fall right in line with all these other quarterbacks. And then let me tell you something else. Another thing that happens here is the fact that they played Nebraska, and Nebraska kept it pretty close. And this is, I think, a sign of the times in college football where I think that Nebraska game, being as close as it was, has hurt the reputation of Oklahoma this year as much as anything, because a close win over Nebraska at this point for a top 10-ish team is laughed at, because Scott Frost has become such a laughingstock. So I think the fact that game wound up being that close, that has just killed their perception with everybody so much, because Nebraska has turned into such a joke. And I mean, Nebraska is competitive enough this year, but they're just so poorly coached. They're giving up scores and special teams. And obviously they did against Oklahoma, and it's really hurt them. That's really hurt them. And so I don't think Nebraska is truly this deplorably bad team. I think they're a pretty average team with average to above average talent that's very poorly coached. And so I think Oklahoma gets partially unfairly judged for that. I also think it's a possibility that West Virginia is a lot better than we think, and a lot better than they looked in that loss to Maryland, who, by the way, is undefeated. So I think as some of this plays out throughout the year, Lincoln Riley was making the case in his press conference earlier this week that basically, hey, we're only a couple plays away. We're not as far off as everybody is. I tend to agree with him. Also, remember last year, they started 1-2, and by the end of the year, they were the best team in the league again. Well, they're kind of having the same slow start this year. They just haven't had the losses to go along with it. So they've maintained the unbeaten record. I wouldn't panic about that if I were Oklahoma. And as it relates to this K-State game, I mean, I think K-State has a chance. I certainly feel better about it than I did each of the last 2 years going into those games when K-State won. But, for those of you that are not K-State fans and paying a lot of attention to it, I mean, the big story of this game is going to be, can Skylar Thompson play, who's K-State's starting quarterback, who's beaten Oklahoma each of the last 2 years. He's been out for the past couple of games. I continue to believe that there's a good chance he will play, even though Chris Kleiman called him doubtful at his press conference. I think some of that is playing coy. I still think there's a pretty good chance that Thompson does play, but how healthy will he be if he's out there? Can he run the ball? K-State has to have quarterback run game to be successful. Those are still a lot of questions that need to be answered as far as that game is concerned. So I think it'll be a game. I think K-State can compete, but I would bet that Oklahoma just continues to grind things out and they'll win this game for now and keep marching on and be generally okay. Kind of my thoughts on that right now. Let's see, Edward. So everyone is Oklahoma State will be the top team in the Big 12. Asking if Oklahoma State's going to be the best team in the Big 12 and everybody else leaves. I will say that Oklahoma State is probably under-discussed at this point, too. They looked a lot better last Saturday. Jay, I see you in there. You never said much about the K-State-Oklahoma State game. Very, very impressed. Very impressed by Oklahoma State. K-State's defense has been pretty good. And Oklahoma State came out with a great game plan. Hit K-State with a 53-yard screen pass on the first play that they had offensively and just had K-State totally off balance the entire first half, and 24 of their 31 points that they scored were from the offense. Seemed like Spencer Sanders got some rhythm. It seems like they were healthier, obviously, and that made a big difference. I think Oklahoma State could be another one of those teams, kind of in the same vein as Oklahoma, just an Oklahoma light, where they had a tough start to the year, but they didn't lose games while weathering that tough start. I mean, they came about as close as you can with Tulsa and Missouri State, but they didn't actually lose those games, and now maybe they regain their footing. We'll know a lot more about Oklahoma State here in the next couple of weeks because their schedule continues to be tough. A la the game that they have against Baylor this week, which leads me into the final push here on this live chat tonight, which is going to be the Big 12 schedule for the week. First, I'll squeeze this in from Wolf58, my favorite Ohio State fan, Wolf58. Don't really have time to interact, partying with friends. Just wanted to show some Big Ten love and support. By the way, Pac-12 is still toast. My man, Wolf58, appreciate you. Thank you for popping in. Thank you for the donation. Have a great time. Go party with your friends, man. Have a good time. Enjoy the night. The night is young. It's only 8 o'clock. I guess if you're in the Eastern time zone, it's 9 o'clock, but still young either way. Yeah, Oklahoma State, Baylor this weekend, man. That's a part of a great slate, not just the Big 12 games, but college football at large this weekend. It's going to be awesome. I actually wish. Now, next weekend's going to be a good week of college football too, but next week is a bye week for K-State, so I won't be covering a game on Saturday. Really looking forward to that slate of games, but this will be like a perfect one this week with everything that's going on to just be able to sit back and take it all in. But Baylor, Oklahoma State is the headliner in the league this week. That's going to be at 6 o'clock, ESPN2. Another night game at Boone Pickens. And I tell you what, like Baylor, maybe Baylor's not under-discussed anymore after beating Iowa State, but they deserve their credit, man. It's a heck of a start. Starting off 4-0 after you just won 2 games last season, I don't care what the first 3 games were competition-wise, to do it and do it as impressively as they did, at least in 2 of the 3 games after the season opener, they were sharp and just pummeled people and then found a way against Iowa State. That's very impressive. And say what you will about the Clones, that still to me is like a top 25 kind of win for Baylor and a step. That's a step. That's a step, no doubt. No matter what happens the rest of the way, Baylor's already taken a firm step in the right direction under Aranda this year. I would still lean Oklahoma State in that game. I know Oklahoma State's like a 3.5 point favorite. I would lean Oklahoma State. Because I like I said, I think they found some life last week. I think they're more used to being in this kind of spot. Those are the things that have me leaning Okie State as far as that game is concerned right now. But I'm extremely excited to watch it. And I think Baylor's a phenomenal story. And I really like Gary Bohannon. Gary, don't call him Jerry. I really like Gary Bohannon, the way he plays, the way he handles himself. And it's been a cool story to see all of that play out. Keith, I appreciate the donation, my friend. Keith says, is college football parity starting to set in like it has in basketball? Outside of Alabama, Georgia, are schools starting to level out in talent? I wouldn't go that far. With what we're seeing right now. I think a lot of it is quarterback turnover. And I think Stuart Mandel wrote about that this week in his mailbag. You have some quarterback turnover in a lot of places where quarterbacks just are not totally clicking, not totally, like Clemson, for instance. Clemson has quarterback turnover. Ohio State has quarterback turnover. Oklahoma, I know Spencer Rattler did play last year, but he's a guy that just hasn't quite fit in and taken that step yet. Like, I think that is a big reason for a lot of what you're seeing around college football right now. I do think there's a chance that over time, some of that talent stuff starts to level out, but really what we're seeing, the kids that are in the game right now over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a high concentration of talent up at the top with those same 5 to 10 schools, much more so than we have like at other times in college football history. So I continue to just think that that's going to be a tough thing for everybody to overcome in terms of if we're trying to spread everything out talent-wise. I hope that we get there because I think it'll be much better for the sport. I mean, I do. I think it's a bummer that the talent is so concentrated right now. I hope we're getting there, Keith. Maybe this is an early sign of it. I would love for that to be the case. And I think almost everybody would, outside of it, unless you're a Bama fan, unless you're an Ohio State fan, unless you're a Clemson fan. I think like everybody enjoys this more. That seems to be the national perception from guys that I listen to and read, that everybody likes the way this season is playing out more and is kind of here for the chaos and the fun of it and some new blood in the playoffs. So I'm here for it, and I hope you're right about that. I'm going to do about 5 to 10 more minutes. If you want to donate to make sure your question or comment gets in there, just click the donate button, the $ underneath the chat box where it says say something. and you can hop in there as well. Texas and TCU, that's outside of Oklahoma K-State, which I just discussed a little bit. Texas and TCU, Texas a 5-point favorite at TCU. Man, I'm inclined to take TCU here. Like I've been really impressed with Texas. I think Texas will win the game. I'll try to give you guys my official picks later in the week on the channel. I'll probably get it up there on Saturday. But I do think that'll be a really close game because TCU, I saw the stat today. Gosh, it was like TCU is 3-6 the week before Texas and 2-7 the week after Texas in the last 10 years when they've been on this streak where they're 7-2 against UT. So it's like TCU, for whatever reason, is just able to channel their inner hate to get up to play Texas every single year, and they kind of struggle with the distraction of the game being before or after, these letdown look-ahead spots, to quote the guys on the Solid Verbal, who I love. You should definitely be listening to the Solid Verbal podcast if you're not. Yeah, man, I think that'll be a really good game. I'm sure TCU will be up for it and look better than they did last week. But you do have to have some major concerns. The thing with TCU right now is I would just be very concerned about that defense after what SMU was able to do offensively last week, and then looking at what Texas was able to do offensively last week themselves. Because, man, Casey Thompson, it really does feel like with Texas it was the wrong guy being the starting quarterback at the beginning of the year, and their problems have really been kind of fixed. Or at least a lot of it's been alleviated by just picking the right guy at quarterback. Casey Thompson seems to be that dude, and he's putting up video game numbers when he's actually been the QB, and Texas looks amazing. I mean, they score basically every chance that they have. Almost every possession they get the ball with Thompson at quarterback. You combine that with Bijan Robinson, who, look, I love Deuce Vaughn. I love Breece Hall. He's a Wichita guy. I was born in Wichita, but Bijan Robinson's the best running back in the Big 12. Letty Brown's great. Kennedy Brooks, great. But Bijan's the best. He's that dude, man. I mean, I think he's the best. I think he's the best player in the Big 12. And so that's a huge edge, obviously, to Texas as well. I don't know. Anytime you start to trust Texas, I feel like it goes the other way. So maybe this will be the week where things like, the pendulum swings back the other way. But for right now, I'm inclined to believe in Texas continuing to keep this thing rolling. And then, man, Red River is going to be fun, right? I mean, especially if Oklahoma and Texas get through this week with wins, Red River should be pretty awesome next week, much as we're all, a little bit inclined to cringe at that game now with those two leaving for the SEC. It can be one big SEC conference game at the Texas State Fair next week. All right, Texas Tech, West Virginia, still pretty interesting to me, 2:30 on ESPN2. West Virginia, touchdown favorite there. This is the prove it game for West Virginia to me, where not that they didn't prove something last week against Oklahoma, but, I've been hearing like, hey, West Virginia, not as bad as they looked against Maryland. Maryland's obviously been good, so that loss doesn't look as bad. But now it's like, okay, back it up, West Virginia. Like, back it up with a performance where you go out and beat a team, like dominate a team that you should. Show me that the moral victory can translate into actual wins. That's what you got to do here. And look, you're facing a Tech team that's down at starting quarterback and just got humiliated last week by giving up the 70 spot to Texas. This is a spot where you really need to win. I would just call it like a put up or shut up game for West Virginia. You're at home, a team that's missing its quarterback and just got humiliated last week, and you're trying to prove a moral victory, correct? Put up or shut up game for West Virginia for sure. For sure. And then, look, we have Kansas, Iowa State. I'll say this about KU. I mean, they continue to be slightly more competitive than I expected this year. Iowa State's going to win the game. They'll win by a lot. But Kansas does seem to be like a regular-ish bad team this year instead of just like in a category of their own bad team, which they were under Les Miles, who was a total and complete disaster. So that's about as much analysis I can give you on Kansas right now. There are at least signs, again, that Lance Leipold's a competent coach, which I think was the hope and kind of the message from Kansas fans when they made that hire. Okay, I see. Next topic, please. I get it. I'll stop talking KU football. That's pretty much going to do it, guys. Like I'm in about an hour here. I'm pretty tired. Going to need to give myself a little R&R here in a second, unless you have something last minute here. and you want to get a donation in, you can certainly do that. Just click the $ below the chat box, below where it says "Say Something." It's been a fun, lively chat tonight. It's been very entertaining reading what's going on there. I may pop on. I say I need some rest. I forgot. I was going to try and do a K-State specific chat. I'll try and do like maybe 30 minutes K-State specific here. I'll tweet out the link. I will tweet out the link on Twitter as soon as this is done. And obviously, if you're a follower of the YouTube channel, you don't have how to hop in there. So if you want to talk just specifically K-State, Oklahoma, and everything that's going on, I'll give you the latest that I know on Skylar Thompson. We can do that. And until then, I bid you all adieu. Pay attention to the channel. I've got a couple of other videos in the works that you're going to see, well, pretty much already done, that you'll see later this week. So we'll keep the fun rolling. And I'll definitely talk to you guys live again on Sunday after hopefully another great weekend of college football. So appreciate you all. Take care, and I will see you soon.